Tonight on the Daily Debrief.
Get your hands up! Get your hands up!
Prosecutors recount the moment when a plainclothes officer shot and killed an unsuspecting stranded motorist. Plus,
came back the same way they left. Normal.
Relatives say the accused killer of a mother of three barely would have had time to commit the crime. The nation's top criminal cases are on the Daily Debrief. It's Tuesday, February 26th. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Debrief. Vincent Hill is here along with me. Gene Rossi will be joining us in just a moment. Opening statements today in the trial of a former Florida cop accused of gunning down a stranded motorist. Newman Raja is charged with attempted first-degree murder and manslaughter regarding the 2015 shooting death of Corey Jones. Jones was stranded on the side of an interstate exit ramp near Palm Beach Gardens, Florida. Raja wearing plain clothes and was in an unmarked van when he pulled up behind the victim, Corey Jones. Jones was scared and went for his gun in the glove compartment. The prosecutor explained the confrontation from both men's perspective.
He jumps out. He's got no indication whatsoever he's a law enforcement officer. He's wearing jeans. He's wearing an inside-out t-shirt, a hat, no badge, nothing. And what does he do? Well, you're going to know what he does because you're going to hear it. And he tells you to. He runs around the front of that van and immediately becomes confrontational with Corey Jones. That's what he chose to do. That was his decision with one only expected outcome. You got Corey Jones stranded in a vehicle waiting for a tow truck, and this is what he gets confronted with 3 o'clock in the morning. You'll hear how Corey Jones had that gun in that box. You'll hear the chimes of the door opening on Corey Jones' SUV because he still had the keys in the ignition. And you'll hear the last words that Corey Jones ever spoke in this world. They weren't confrontational words. They weren't fighting words. They were calm words that unfortunately turned to fear.
What defendant Newman Raja was not counting on was for Corey Jones to be on the phone with roadside assist and that the call was being recorded. Prosecutors laid out what the recording will show.
There's nothing but an overly aggressive and immediately hostile attitude. You hear it for yourselves. You make the decision. You're the judges of the credibility of everybody, including him. Because you will hear from him. You'll hear, when he jumps out of that van, you'll hear something fast, real short, and Corey Jones' response is, huh? I'm good. That's his response. With as much effect as that. And what's the response from our law enforcement officer on duty that's supposed to be helping a stranded citizen? Really? Yeah, I'm good. Really? That's what he's saying. That's not how an officer talks to a citizen at 3 o'clock in the morning on the side of the road. But that's how he spoke to what he saw with Corey Jones on the side of that road. As this defendant is saying these words to Corey Jones, and Corey Jones is responding back, he is getting closer and closer to Corey Jones. He's actually chasing Corey Jones away from his vehicle. Corey's already retreating back out of his doorway to the back of his vehicle. A citizen that's stranded on the side of the road, already being chased from his vehicle by an officer who's sitting there saying, really? And when Corey Jones lastly says, yeah, now he starts saying even more hostile. Get your hands up. Get your hands up. That's what he's treating. That's how he's treating a stranded citizen. Immediately within seconds, that's what he's saying. You know, profane words being shouted at a time when a guy is sitting with a broken down car.
That recorded phone call with roadside assist, prosecutors said, gave a different version of events from what Newman Raja said occurred.
There's a huge difference between misremembering something and just flat out being untruthful. There's a huge difference between trying to think about what happened and intentionally saying something to help you get away with what you did. We've all seen it. Whether it's kids, whether it's a family, coworkers, we all seen it. And you're going to see it again when you watch him give that statement that morning. You get to judge his credibility. With great power comes great responsibility. We choose to do this. We choose to take on that great power and that great responsibility. He chose to do it. You get to decide whether or not what he said was credible. Which ones are irrefutable? That report is irrefutable. And who has a less than credible reason to tell you something that actually accords with the evidence that you'll see? All the credible evidence is going to point to one thing. His guilt.
The defense, meanwhile, said the victim's death was a tragedy and said that this case would result in a double tragedy if Officer Newman Raja were to be convicted. The defense also said Raja was acting in self-defense because Corey Jones drew his gun first.
This is a terribly sad and tragic case. It's an example of a perfect storm that turned deadly when Corey Jones pointed a loaded handgun at Newman Raja. But Mr. Jones's death was not the result of any criminal act committed by Newman Raja. It was a perfect storm that turned deadly when Mr. Jones pointed that handgun and Mr. Raja, in defending himself, fired his handgun. Mr. Jones pointed the handgun at Mr. Raja not once, but twice. And each time Mr. Raja fired, he was acting to defend himself. The fact that Corey Jones is dead is undeniably sad and tragic. Another man, Newman Raja, is being prosecuted for crimes that he's not guilty of. And to convict him would be sad and tragic. Because the evidence will show that Mr. Raja was lawfully and justifiably defending himself after Mr. Jones pointed a loaded handgun at him. The state made a very powerful opening statement, much of it based upon emotion. We're going to lay out the facts of the case, which is what you need to determine your verdict in this case. The judge will tell you that emotion should not play a part in your verdict. Facts should.
All right, the defense kept circling back to this claim that Corey Jones pointed his gun at Newman Raja first.
October 18, 2015, Corey Jones pointed a loaded handgun at Newman Raja. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a photograph of the handgun that Mr. Jones bought several days before this incident. This is another photograph taken of the muzzle of the gun, also taken by the crime scene. And the reason I'm showing you this is because this area around the barrel of the gun is going to become extremely important. The morning this incident occurred, Mr. Raja gave a voluntary cooperative statement to investigators. When he gave that video walkthrough, he told the investigators that he saw something very specific when Corey Jones pointed the firearm at him. said that he saw a red flickering light around the barrel of the handgun when Mr. Jones pointed it at him.
A couple of witnesses testified that they heard the gunfire. One said that she looked out of a window and saw Raja standing with a gun in one hand and a phone in the other. The first responding officer testified as to having this conversation with Raja.
Told me that Mr. Jones, later determined Mr. Jones, that he had a gun and that he had ordered him to drop it and he believed he had shot him. He then told me that the subject ran north in the grass between the off-ramp and the Doubletree Hotel, and he said he saw him throw what he believed was the silver gun, because he said he had a silver gun in the grass behind Mr. Jones' vehicle.
Here for analysis now, attorney Gene Rossi, law enforcement expert Vincent Hill. Gene, let me throw this one your way here. The defense is saying that this shouldn't be based on emotion, but over and over again, the defense talked about how sad everything is. So is it emotion or is it not? I'm calling that a flat-out contradiction. What do you think?
Well, it was emotion in how he passed away, because when you have allegedly have a gun pointed at your head and you're a police officer and has a red dot flashing, that means you're about ready to die. And so emotion means you're going to fight back and stand your ground, if you will, and
no, wait a
take
minute.
some shots.
Let me stop you there, Gene. Wait a minute. He instigated this by pulling up, not in uniform, not in a marked car, no flashing lights, didn't even flash his badge. Vincent, is this the way police officers are supposed to act when they are not in uniform and they are not in a marked black and white?
Right. Well, that's just it, Aaron. Nothing he did that night was based on training and tactics. The way he pulled up, he's in plain clothes. He doesn't identify himself as a police officer, even though he says he did. It goes back to training. Every time, even if you're in uniform, plain clothes, when you get out of a vehicle or when you're approaching someone, you yell police, you say I'm the police, but he did not do that, Aaron, and I think that's what this comes down to here.
Okay, so why didn't he do it? What was going through his mind?
Aaron, I don't know what was going through his mind. I think, now to preface this, anything in policing can escalate very quickly. But the fact that he didn't do it, that's the million-dollar question, because he's in plain clothes. It's 3 in the morning. Corey Jones did not think this individual was a police officer.
Gene, let me ask you this one. They're going after this one as an attempted murder case, but the victim is dead. So why are they going for attempted murder here?
Well, I read the charges, and I'm trying to figure out why. I don't know why, frankly. I would just stick with second degree. The attempted murder, I guess it's because there are 2 rounds, and there were 10 seconds separating the rounds, so those are separate counts. And the first one, was attempted, and the second one was the second degree. That's my only thought. I would want to add this about everything appears to be unprofessional. He did everything outside the box, beyond the standard operating procedures. But if I'm the defense attorney, I'm going to argue that what may not be caught on that tape is what he said 15 feet from the car, where he identified himself as a police officer.
Interesting point, Gene. Interesting point. Look, let's move along here. We've got a lot to talk about in the show tonight here. A judge has shut down live coverage of a Kentucky trial involving a janitor accused of murdering his coworker. David Dooley is facing his second trial regarding the death of Michelle Mockbee. The prosecutor in the original case was having an affair with the lead investigator. That first prosecutor also failed to turn over a surveillance video to the defense. Dooley and his wife both worked with the victim. Prosecutors theorized that Mockbee was going to put an end to Dooley's wife's practice of submitting fraudulent time cards. So the prosecution thinks Dooley killed the victim in order to keep the money flowing. No more coverage of that case. Still ahead tonight, the case of a Florida man accused of killing a mother of 3. He's accused of stabbing her to help out his friend, the victim's ex-husband, who was locked in a custody dispute with the victim. We'll take you back inside the courtroom after the break. The defense now has the case of a Florida man accused of killing a mother of 3. David Russell Holbrook Jr., is facing the jury following the death of Melissa Howard. Her daughter found her stabbed and beaten in 2006. The victim had just won a child custody battle against her ex-husband, Brian. Brian was a friend to the defendant. The ex-husband himself was at a large party, giving him an alibi for the time of the killing. An expert testified in this case that Holbrook's DNA matched male DNA found on Howard's blood-soaked sweatshirt. But that expert also admitted she contaminated the evidence. A pair of scissors used to process a sex assault case were not cleaned before an analyst used them to cut a piece from the sweatshirt in this case. The results and the mix-up led to this testimony.
When you compared B20E to Russell Holbrook's standard, were you able to draw a conclusion?
Yes. Again, the sample had a mixture, and I assumed that Melissa Howard was a contributor, and that the partial foreign DNA profile matched the DNA profile from David Russell Holbrook. I did have other limited information that was observed in the sample that may suggest the possibility of an additional contributor. For the 9 genetic markers, the frequency of occurrence of the partial DNA profile for unrelated individuals is 1 in 39 million.
You brought more DNA over from a pair of scissors that made a cutting that may or may not have been cleaned. Given not cleaned properly, and y'all came up with a new procedure for cleaning scissors because of this you described.
Yes.
Is that right? So you brought more DNA over from a pair of scissors from a cutting into this sweatshirt than all of that foreign DNA that we've been talking about today. Is that correct?
Yes.
The defense called its own DNA expert to fight back against the state's conclusions.
The calculations that Jennifer Hattler performed when she did the statistics on that B20E mixture?
Yes.
Were you able to determine whether she did a calculation for a 2-person mixture versus a 3-person mixture?
It appeared to be a 2-person mixture.
And do you believe that Jennifer Hattler violated any FDLE standard operating procedures when she performed her analysis?
Yes.
We heard testimony that there were investigators in the lab both times when Jennifer Hattler was swabbing the B20E sweatshirt. I think the first was A through H and the second was I through M. Believe the testimony is that they may not have been wearing, then they're not sure if they were wearing protective gear. Is that a problem?
Yes, that's always a problem to have people in the laboratory without protective gear because they could be shedding their DNA or causing some sort of contamination in that case or other cases.
And that's particularly so now in 2019 when kits are much more sensitive?
Our kits are very sensitive, just like Ms. Hattler had testified that, her baby's DNA had gotten into a sample and the baby wasn't even into the lab.
Late yesterday, investigators played a wiretapped phone call between the defendant and his brother. The two discussed this DNA and how it possibly got on the victim's sweatshirt. Previous testimony suggests that Holbrook went to the victim's home to scare her into giving custody of her child back to the father.
Yeah, they just left my house. So I'm gonna miss it? Yeah. Tell her what's going on, be prepared, it's happening. They have your DNA in the house. They said 2 days prior that they got me and you at a Tom Thumb, and then Terry and Taylor says we followed Melissa to her house from the Tom Thumb, and I sat in the truck while you went in the house 2 days prior. See, that just proves they left a phone call. The rest of the yeah, and I know they're listening to our phone calls. I've never been to a house, and they told Richie that I told them that I've been to her house before. I've never been there. I wouldn't with you at a Tom Thumb and follow her home at any point. Yeah, and that's not what happened either. So I know the full. Yes. because I never went with you to her house. That's an idiot. When I come down in a couple of weeks, I'll tell you how that whole part went down. That wasn't nothing like what you just said. They told Missy that, that Brian tried to solicit two guys for Mr. work with him to do it, and they told him no. So they were so scared of Brian that they left town. They moved out of town, and then they went to use. Yeah, if I was guilty, I'd be in another country right now.
A relative who observed the defendant at a birthday party says he left and came back. The state says that's the window where the murder was occurring.
Did you notice whether there was any blood on Russell's clothing?
No, sir.
Was there any blood on Michael's clothing? Okay. How would you describe their demeanor?
Came back the same way they left. Normal.
All right, let's turn once again to Gene Rossi, Vincent Hill here. Gene, what do you think? Do they got this guy, or is there reasonable doubt?
I'll tell you this. When they have experts, the DNA expert for the government, and the way they handled that evidence is an absolute disgrace, and they should either be suspended or fired. And they look like a bunch of Keystone cops. So that's reasonable doubt right there. I'm going to go back to the OJ trial, and everybody's got their views on that. I remember Mr. Fong was on the stand for probably 4 days, and there was a lot of inconsistencies in his testimony. And this reminds me of what happened in that trial.
It's giving you bad memories. Vincent, real quick, what do you think?
Hey, listen, he says, I know I'm being recorded, and he says several times, I wasn't at the house. There's a reason he did that, Aaron.
Yeah, I mean, we could write a book about those interrogation recordings. Gene, Vincent, thanks a lot. We'll see you back here for live trial coverage starting at 9 a.m. on the Law&Crime Network.